Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Azulay. I'm with Alliance for a Green Economy. Welcome to the Renewable Heat Now media briefing on electrification in the state budget. I just want to let you all know that we are recording this briefing and we will have the recording available for members of the media. I will put my email in the chat so that you can contact me to get a copy of the recording momentarily. During this briefing, we're going to ask folks to please not put too much content in the chat. We find that that can be distracting for our speakers. So if y'all can hold your questions till the end, we will be taking questions at the end. And I think with that, I will hand it over to Liz Moran from Earthjustice.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Liz Moran. I'm the New York policy advocate for Earthjustice, and Earthjustice is a proud member of the Renewable Heat Now campaign, which is dedicated to moving buildings off of fossil fuels. So we're all gathered today to call for Governor Hochul and the New York State Legislature to ensure that the 2022 budget includes key policies and funding mechanisms to move buildings off of fossil fuels. This comes at a really critical moment in the climate crisis and the state's ability to meet our critical climate law that calls for society to move off of fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. Just last week, a new report was released by the IPCC that found climate change might be outpacing our ability to adapt due to government inaction. That means that the communities that have already been bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, particularly communities of color and low-income communities, are going to be further risked by this government action. Here in New York, we can't let that be the case. Addressing greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector is a common sense and much needed move from government. In New York, 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from this sector, and in New York City, it's even larger at 70%. Beyond contributing to the immediate climate crisis, there are some very immediate and real-world health impacts from burning fossil fuels in buildings that actually results in deaths. According to a study from RMI, in New York, air pollution from burning fossil fuels in buildings led to an estimated 1,940 early deaths and 21 billion in health impact costs in 2017. We have to stop this. And New York has a key opportunity to do just that in this year's budget to address these emissions through a number of policies that are part of the Renewable Heat Now package, which we're going to be walking you through. In the upcoming days, we're expecting to see the Senate and Assembly one-house budgets. We are urging the legislature to include these policies in their one-house budgets and make sure that these are in the final budget. So at this point, I'm going to be turning it to our fantastic speakers today. We're going to talk about why these policies are so important to them and why lawmakers should adopt this package in the budget. So our first speaker is Stephanie Doba, and I apologize if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, so please correct me.
No, that was correct. Thank you, Liz, and thanks for having me. I live in Park Slope, Brooklyn, in a brownstone row house built in 1889, and I did a retrofit, very retro, to heat pumps in my home in 2021. Why we installed them were two reasons. One, I had experienced Mitsubishi air source heat pump system for cooling in a relative's home, and oh my gosh, how superior that was to our clunky, noisy, horrible room air conditioners in our bedrooms. And number two, I've been extremely worried about the climate crisis for many years, and I've been an activist now that I'm retired with the Sierra Club. So I decided it was time to put some money where my mouth is. So I learned more about heat pumps from a webinar at Heat Cool Smart Brooklyn. And I also visited the home of a neighbor who had heat pumps installed in his house because I really wanted to see that they worked. And when he told me, yeah, I haven't had to run my gas furnace in 5 years, it's like, okay, I've seen it work. in the summer, I hear that it works in the winter, I can do this. The incentives and rebates really helped to reduce my cost by about a third. So we had them put in May 2021. I have actually two systems, one, the condensing unit and air handlers for our 3 floors of the house, and a separate condensing unit and air handlers for my tenant's apartment. So we each control our own comfort, our own heat and our own cooling. So it's very helpful to be able to customize how we control our heat and cooling functions. And it makes us much more mindful of conserving energy when we see it right on our electric bills. So since then, I've been telling others, and 2 of my friends and neighbors have gone on to install their own systems. So I hope that personal experience can help move this forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Stephanie has really outlined why the All Electric Buildings Act is such a good move for the legislature and the governor to make. It is very doable and beneficial to move buildings off of fossil fuels, especially when they're just being constructed as well. So I'll now turn it over to our next speaker, Maggie and our next speakers, Maggie and John Reilly.
Good morning, everyone. As Stephanie said, it's very important to let people know about this. So before I actually get started, John and I have done a virtual tour, and it's on YouTube, so we can supply that link to everybody if you want to learn more about the air source heat pumps and what we've done. But so John and I transitioned our New York Mills home that's in central New York off fossil fuels to do our part to mitigate the harmful effects of climate change. It started when we converted to battery operated gardening equipment, including our lawnmower. We bought an electric vehicle in 2019, and then later that year we installed rooftop solar that generates almost all our power. Then in 2020, we installed the major component of our transition to renewable energy, an air source heat pump system, including a heat pump hot water heater. In 2022, so far, we have had 14 overnight lows of below 0 temperature, with the lowest being minus 14 degrees. We were able to maintain a comfortable, consistent room temperature of 68 degrees more easily than we have done with our gas boiler. We experienced not only warmth in the coldest of winters, but improved hot water efficiency. So we no longer have cold showers, and we value the air conditioning that we didn't have with our hot water baseboard system. We're experiencing lower maintenance and increased reliability from our battery operated mower, our Tesla EV, the air source heat pump system, and the solar array that provides most of our electric power needs. This is all while we personally reduced our carbon footprint from 15 tons to 1.5 tons. That was a factor of 10. Just think if we get 1.5 million homes to go off fossil fuel by 2030, that would be over 20 million tons of carbon that is not going into the air. For New York to become the climate world leader, we must pass the legislation that electrifies New York now. The urgency of this action can't be understated. So if anybody wants to learn about these air source heat pumps, they totally work in cold climate, and we have cold climate here in central New York. So please reach out. We'll give you that link. We would be happy to talk to anybody. And as Stephanie said, we have a lot of friends that have converted over. We just need a workforce now that can help us do that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. You know, that story really shows why this package is so important. Our coalition is asking for $1 billion to go towards ensuring all buildings can go all electric, and to make sure it's done so it's affordable for all New Yorkers. we're also pushing for the Gas Transition and Affordable Energy Act, which will put the steps in place to make sure policies are on the books from the Public Service Commission, to also ensure this transition goes as easily and smoothly as possible and is affordable for all New Yorkers. So with that, I'll turn to our next speaker, Ponikau. I'm so sorry, I'm probably butchering your name.
It's like a pony and a cow. It's pretty easy. So, yeah, thank you for having me here. My name is Jens Ponikau. I'm the principal of Buffalo Geothermal, and I'm also the president of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization. We're a design build company in Buffalo, but we operate throughout the state here. And we are specifically specializing in multifamily buildings, as well as new ones, as well as existing ones, which are retrofits. So I want to tell you a little bit about the affordable housing projects we're doing, or we've been doing. One of them we did in 2014. That was a Lockport Housing Authority, where we started with the administrative building, and they were joking around and said, well, we're our own guinea pigs, so if you can do our office building, and then we cut you loose on our tenant buildings. And they indeed did so. So we converted their tenant building. It was 9 building blocks for 72 apartments. And we installed a geothermal system to provide heating, but also cooling. And they never had cooling before. That was very important for them because they had people collapsing, specifically all elderly and more vulnerable people living there. And we also provide the entire domestic hot water for them. So their entire complex has no gas. It used to be electric resistance heat, and we converted them over to geothermal 100%. As you can see here, this is in the background. This is my new temporary office. I'm sitting at the New York City Housing Authority, and this is the Eastchester development. And we are converting 2 of their developments with a total of 17 high rises and 3,000 apartments to geothermal. And we're starting right now with converting the domestic hot water, which actually gets them to their 40% emission reduction goal by 2030. And as a next phase, and in the phase 2, we're planning to do heating and cooling here as well. So the system is designed to be expanded then. And of course, they don't have the funding for all of it at once, but actually that gets them on the time sliding scale we're all shooting for. So if you have any question now, if this is feasible, if we can do that in the Bronx, in existing 70, 80-year-old high rises in affordable housing projects, you can do it everywhere. That's kind of my take home message. Thank you very much.
That is the perfect take-home message and exactly what we're trying to demonstrate today, that this can take place across New York State and is already happening. So we just need the policies in place to make sure that this starts happening everywhere and ensures that we meet the state's climate goals. So with that, I'm going to turn it to our next speaker, Zach Fink.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zachary Fink. I'm the owner of ZBF Geothermal and a board member of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization, as well as Jens. And I'm also a design build contractor downstate on Long Island in New York City, as well as a geothermal consultant. My geothermal journey started, I guess, in 2008, when I started working for the family HVAC business. Never thought I would be in the HVAC business, but for me, this goes full circle. My grandfather started a company back in the 50s, converting people to oil hot water heaters from coal hot water heaters. My uncle's company converted people from oil to gas, and now we're converting people from gas and oil to electrification. So over the 70 years that my family's been in the industry, we've seen it go full circle. Over my career, I've converted thousands of homes, apartments, and buildings to electrification, mainly geothermal, everywhere from Manhattan to the suburbs on Long Island and Westchester. So we can pretty much do it any place. We currently have projects under construction as high as 26 stories in New York City, with taller buildings currently under design. So whenever someone tells me that they can't fit it, We're putting them under buildings, under parking lots, so we can really implement it from a technology standpoint just about any place. The biggest takeaway to me, though, is the tenants that are living in these buildings in New York City have lower noise, which helps, which helps with air quality in the house and just more comfortable environment. And then I did dinner with one of my developers last night, and we looked at 2 of their buildings in their portfolio built the same year, one with geothermal, one with a conventional heating and cooling system. And the geothermal building had a 67% cost reduction for heating and cooling for the tenants. For affordable housing, that's a huge impact on their monthly budgets. So my takeaway would be, geothermal and air source heat pumps can be implemented anywhere. The technology is ready. And that every building that we build with fossil fuels on it now is one building tougher to convert later. So we would encourage, passing the package of bills and focusing on, converting both existing and new building stock.
Thanks so much, Zach. A really important point. The technology is there. Anything indicating otherwise is myth at this point. And there's a clear number of crises underway that indicate we need to move off of fossil fuels, including for our energy independence. So our next speaker is Francis Rodriguez.
Hi, good morning. I'm sorry. So yes, my name is Francis Rodriguez. I'm the Weatherization Director for Association for Energy Affordability. And we serve an area in the Bronx and Queens, providing home improvement work to these buildings. We have a site that we're working with in NYS, where we did improvements in the building, changing windows and making the building more efficient. And I think, one point that I want to make sure that is clear is that that's key in trying these buildings and electrifying these buildings. Working on the envelope has to be part of the equation. We cannot just go to any one of these houses or buildings and then put a heat pump system and believe that it's going to work the same way that the boiler was working. So making sure that the system, that the building that the work is done to reduce the amount of heat that is needed is essential to make sure that the new system is going to work. In this building that we have with NYS, we are right now, besides the work that we did to make, like one of the items that we include was doing high performance windows. And these windows will reduce the amount of heat that the building will need. We are also working on a pilot to install a stove, electric stove, induction stove in 10 apartments and other 10 where we are doing monitoring of the air to find out just what is the air quality that are changing with this stove. Besides the fact that, yes, changing them to electric will provide also the additional benefit to those tenants. And then we're also working on a different pilot to install a PTHP, a package terminal heat pump that will go on the walls. And this building had AC sleeves that the tenants will use for the air conditioner. And what we did was that what we are doing is that we are putting this package terminal unit, like the one you see on my left, on those sleeves. So the tenant can operate for both heating and cooling through the same unit. Right now we have done about 3 apartments of the 6 that we have in the pilot, and the idea is to monitor this so we can then see how these package terminal units will provide the amount of heating that the apartment needs throughout the winter. It was done. We don't have the data yet to show that it's really satisfying, but we believe that this unit will satisfy those units. And on the stove side, we are also monitoring, comparing the 20 apartments, the 10 that are getting the stove to the 10 that are getting just the control base. So we can then see how the air quality has been changing based on the stove usage in those apartments. And hopefully in 6 months from now, we're gonna have enough data that will tell us that besides the energy improvements, and the improvement to the environment, there is also an indoor air quality factor that really will be key in putting this forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Francis. I think this really emphasized the importance of making sure the budget includes $1 billion for affordable housing transition to all electric. This funding would include weatherization of homes and making sure that buildings are as efficient as possible It's another reason why the codes and standards legislation, which is in the Renewable Heat Now package, is so important. We need to make sure that not only are our buildings off of fossil fuel, but they are energy efficient. So we're consuming less energy overall. With that, I'll turn to our next speaker, Amar Shah.
Thanks, Liz. My name is Amar Shah. I'm a manager at the Rocky Mountain Institute, a think tank focused on just, prosperous, and zero energy transition. My core message is that electrification of buildings will lower costs for New Yorkers, improve air quality and health, and support the state's climate goals. I want to talk about costs and benefits in two ways. First, at a higher level, it will save costs for all New Yorkers. So building electrification has been identified by New York's Climate Action Council as the least cost and most technologically feasible approach to decarbonize buildings and achieve the state's goals. Second, it also happens to provide benefits in a number of additional and important ways when looking at some of the costs of a business as usual approach. Health, Liz mentioned a study from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, which RMI had cited, which quantifies the premature deaths and air pollution from buildings. That study found that New York has the largest toll of any state in the country, with billions annually in societal costs of these impacts. Second, rising gas infrastructure investments. The American Gas Association reports that investments in our aging gas distribution system have tripled in just the last 8 years. We're talking billions of dollars a year. At the same time as studies tell us we need to essentially shift away from gas combustion in buildings in just a few decades. Electrification offers a way to limit stranded new gas assets and protect ratepayers along the way. At a project level, electrification can be cost effective as well. For new construction, the cheapest time to electrify a building is before it's built. During the design phase, you can save money. RMI analysis has found that a new all-electric single-family home in New York City can lower life cycle costs versus a mixed-fuel home due to saved gas connection costs, as well as the ability of efficient electric equipment like heat pumps to provide both heating and cooling instead of requiring two appliances. NYSERDA in New York State has observed that new construction costs come down quickly with just a bit of learning and repeating as the market builds penetration. On the retrofit side, we see customers saving on operating costs right off the bat with heating oil, with electric resistance, and with propane. And we see opportunities for electrification in areas that can help avoid costly new gas infrastructure investments, which New York State has a number of that they are attempting to mitigate. So just to close, I should note there is a cost to waiting. Building all electric and efficient today can significantly reduce carbon emissions. For New York City alone, we found the benefit was something akin to 2 million tons by 2040, and that number could be even larger for New York State. We need new construction and utility investments that future-proof the state and prevent more expensive costs down the road. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amar. Really important points have been made here, particularly regarding how not moving off of fossil fuels is such a major health threat to a number of communities. So our final speaker is Lonnie Portis. So I'll turn it over to you, Lonnie.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lonnie Portis. I'm the Environmental Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at WEAC for Environmental Justice, and I always appreciate the opportunity to speak on the importance of building electrification. Quick background, and WEAC is an organization based in Harlem, and we've been fighting environmental racism at the city, state, and federal levels for more than 30 years. We've been entrenched in environmental health and justice advocacy work since our beginning. Currently, we act as a leading advocate in fight to help transition homes and buildings off of natural gas and other fossil fuels that are used for heating, cooking, in favor for electricity from renewable energy sources. So a 2021 study published in the journal Science Advances found that racial ethnic minorities in the United States are exposed to 17% more PM 2.5 pollution associated with residential gas combustion than the population average, with Black Americans facing 32% higher exposure. This has led to disparate health outcomes for communities of color, which experience higher rates of respiratory diseases like asthma. Relying on dirty fossil fuels like natural gas to heat homes and cook our food leads to startlingly high indoor air pollution. This is the one that gets me every time. The use of gas stove can create indoor nitrogen dioxide concentrations that often exceed US outdoor pollution standards. Like, let that sink in for a second. And living in a home with a gas stove can increase a child's risk of asthma by 42%. Unfortunately, New York leads the nation in premature deaths resulting from the air pollution caused by burning fossil fuels in buildings for heating, hot water, and cooking. It's imperative that we drastically improve air quality in more vulnerable communities, especially as summers continue to break record highs and trigger dangerous respiratory responses that lead to hospitalizations and premature death. Based on everything that people have said so far on this panel, there are so many benefits to building all electric, and there's also clear health benefits as well. There's an opportunity to ensure that neighborhoods that are hit first and worst with air pollution and climate change see development that are all electric and improve the air quality for the residents who call these places home. In building electric also enables New York to meet its climate targets in a way that ensures everyone has a safe, warm, healthy home. And this, these are just all of the reasons why this is really important for us to advance. It's kind of an easy win, and we're looking forward to continuing to advocate for this work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lonnie, and thank you to all of the wonderful speakers today. Before we go to Q&A, I just want to take a moment to outline the Renewable Heat Now package. All of our speakers have done a fabulous job demonstrating why this package is so important and necessary and also doable. We've heard from speakers that electrification and weatherization is already happening across the state. It is technologically feasible, it is affordable, and it is critically important that we do this to protect the public health of New Yorkers and meet our climate goals. So the Renewable Heat Now package includes a request for $1 billion annually for a green affordable housing budget, the All Electric Building Act, which is Senate Bill 6843A, or actually it's B now, Assembly Bill 8431A, the Advanced Building Appliance and Equipment Standards Act, colloquially known as the Codes and Standards Bill, that's Senate Bill 7176 and Assembly Bill 8143, the Gas Transition and Affordable Energy Act, which is Senate Bill 8198 and Assembly Bill 9329. And lastly, the fossil-free heating tax credit and sales tax exemption bills. So this package has components that were included in the governor's budget proposal. There is some level of funding that would go towards transitioning homes off of fossil fuels. There is the codes and standards legislation, components of that were included in the governor's one house budget. And the governor has a directive to move buildings off of fossil fuels no later than 2027. But we are pushing for the All Electric Buildings Act because of its critically needed, much more ambitious timeline. So there are components within the budget so far that would address this package, but we need this full package in the budget to truly ensure that New York State is ready to move buildings off of fossil fuels immediately. So with that, I will turn it over to Jessica, who will help facilitate the Q&A. Yes, I'll briefly note to folks to move their attention towards a number of studies that back up many of the facts we've cited today. There are a number of studies indicating the health impacts of fossil fuel combustion in buildings, that document that this is an affordable and cost competitive move for New York to make. So we urge attendees to review those studies and review our Renewable Heat Now package. Jessica.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. Okay, so we are going to take some questions now from members of the media. If you have any questions, please use the raise your hand function of the Zoom, which you can find down at the bottom of your screen, and we will unmute you if you have any questions. Okay, it looks like Marie French has a question, and I think Bryn, if you can unmute Marie, that would be great.
Yeah, hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I guess I'm just curious, obviously you guys have talked about this package for a little while. The governor's budget is out. We're still waiting to see what the one houses look like. I mean, what is the sense you're getting about whether, the Senate or Assembly is going to embrace some of these components? Do you feel that it's likely that this will get some support in those one house budgets?
Liz, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here, and others, of course, feel free to do so as well. There's been some pretty good indications about the legislative response to these bills. I'll note the All Electric Buildings Act is actually moving through the Senate Housing Committee today and was recently amended. So there seems to be some positive indications towards that bill and moving it forward. So far there has been some good feedback, but of course, how much policy ends up in the one house budgets, I think many will have to wait and see until they actually come out, but there have been some positive indications so far.
Thank you, Liz. I see Jeff St. John has a question, so if Bryn can unmute Jeff.
Hi, thank you. I was hoping you guys might be able to help me understand the key gaps that you guys see between the policies that the governor has proposed and that New York has been implementing on this front, and what you have put together in this legislative package. Just trying to get a sense of whether it's amount of funding, whether it's that is carrots, whether there are particular sticks such as efficiency codes or natural gas phase out that you think are critical that are absent from the policy mix at present, or perhaps workforce development. I'm not sure what the key gaps are, and I was hoping you guys could help me understand that.
Liz, do you want to start on this and I can follow up?
Sure. So I think one, to provide some context, New York State has, of course, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in law, which sets really important climate goals on the books, including achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, a 100% carbon-free grid by 2040, and so on. But what we're still looking for are the policies to be put in place that will actually help us meet those those goals that are in law. So in terms of the policies that we need, it really is, we've identified this package because we don't have enough in place to move buildings at this pace we need off of fossil fuels. So this has even been identified by the governor by including some of the pieces that she has, but we have this package because we want to make sure that it meets the need that has been demonstrated and, responds to the call of action. So for example, the governor has included a initiative to halt the use of fossil fuels in new construction. We see this as a really common sense step because if we're building new buildings and we know the technology is there, why would we have them continue to rely upon fossil fuels, especially at such a critical juncture in the climate crisis? So the governor has called for a prohibition on fossil fuels in new construction by 2027. We think that timeline is way too slow, especially since we already know that this is happening. We know the technology is there and needed. So the All Electric Buildings Act would fill that gap by directing fossil fuels to be prohibited from new construction starting in 2024. There's some caveats and waivers in there for larger buildings, but even those would be ending by the end of 2026. So that's just one example. In terms of funding, that's a very clear need as well. The governor has included $250 million that would be spent over the course of 5 years for addressing weatherization for affordable housings and helping transition buildings to become all electric. But that's not enough funding to ensure that we meet our goal of electrifying 2 million homes in New York. So those are just some of the gaps. We've gone on too long. I feel like others should chime in as necessary.
Yes, I think, Liz, you covered it really well. And I think maybe to sum it up, we think that the governor's budget was a really great first step, and there's a lot of positive things in the budget, and a lot of the policies that we need are indicated in her budget. And the bills that we have in our package have a lot more detail and a lot more urgency. Okay, I see Greta Moran with her hand up. So if Bryn could unmute Greta.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on a little bit what in general what you think of the Climate Action Council's scoping plan for the CLCPA, and what is missing there?
So I could start with this, and if others want to chime in, that would be great. So we are still reading through the Climate Action Council scoping plan. It's very detailed and there's a lot in there. But on a high level, it's important to note that the scoping plan really indicates the scale and the pace that is needed to meet the 40% greenhouse gas reduction mandate by 2030 and the 85% reduction by 2050. And the analysis that was done as part of that plan shows 1.5 million to 1.8 million buildings moving off of fossil fuels and getting heat pumps by 2030 if we're going to meet that 2030 target. So that really indicates how fast we need to move and how big we need to go in order to, in the building sector, which accounts for about a third of the greenhouse gases in the state, what we need to do in the building sector, on what timeline and how big, in order to meet that goal. So our package, we see that as being in line with what the Climate Action Council scoping plan is saying we need to do. And we're trying to move these pieces and get them into law so that we can move forward. And I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
I think you've put it perfectly, Jessica. I would just add that there's nothing in fact, if anything, the climate scoping plan indicates the need for legislative action. It shows the breadth of needs we have to make sure that we do meet our climate mandates, but it certainly does not preclude, in fact, if anything, it encourages climate action. And we know that there's an urgency to this crisis. So it's important that the legislature doesn't use the climate scoping plan as an excuse for inaction, and that they move forward with the policies we know we need to meet our climate law.
Okay, I see that Jeff still has his hand up. Jeff, do you have a follow-up question, or is that your hand being up from before?
That was me leaving my hand up. But I guess, let's see, if I had to ask something, I might ask you guys to help me understand how you can explain to folks how the pieces of the increased funding for electrifying heat in buildings would address key barriers to expanding the use of these technologies in buildings. I'm wondering if you can help me understand how much of it needs to go to incentives to increase the or reduce the upfront costs for building owners installing them. How much of it is seen as important to kind of catalyze private sector development of the manufacturing and supply chain and installation required to kind of scale up to the scale we need, or maybe talk through kind of like that multi-tiered kind of approach to taking what's a relatively small kind of like infrastructure and getting it going.
Great question. So I might see if Jens or Zach, if you want to talk, or Francis, about some of the funding gaps that you are seeing in the field as you're electrifying buildings.
Yeah, I mean, I just came from another meeting with legislators here, and we were just explaining to them, it's important to understand that it's not necessarily that geothermal is significantly more expensive than conventional. The problem is that the cost of the conventional, for example, gas, is socialized. So in New York State, we have the 100-foot rule, where somebody gets connected to the main in the street. And that price is zero to the homeowner, but in Con Edison territory, for example, it is $33,000 on average for that connection, for on average of 45 feet or 49 feet actually to that main. So in other words, now you're a homeowner, you get the gas connection for free, but it's not free, it's actually socialized. And all the ratepayers in New York are paying for that. It was a good law at that time because it made sure that everybody had access to energy, and that cost was socialized. We don't have that for renewables. In other words, if you're now a homeowner, you are not getting any kind of connection or installation costs other than incentives in that way. But it's not socialized like it is in the current system. That has created the perception that gas is cheap. It's not cheap. Again, it's just socialized. And that has disturbed the marketplace, that if you want to do something the right thing and install renewable technologies, you're certainly paying for the installation costs out of your own pocket, while the gas lines into your house are provided you for free. And that's kind of the flawed system which they need to fix. And then it's very, very easy that geothermal and air source heat pumps can compete with the existing fossil fuel infrastructure.
To elaborate on what Jens said, and a little bit of a tangent as well. I have a developer doing a project in Far Rockaway and a project on the other side of the channel, I guess. You can see the two projects from each other. One of them is in PSEG Long Island territory, and one of them is in Con Edison territory. The project on Long Island territory gets about $1,000 per apartment. The project in Con Ed territory in Brooklyn gets about $8,500 per apartment. So even within New York State, for two projects that you can literally see each other, there's a big disparity in incentives. They have similar electric costs, similar cost of construction. So I think that part of the bridging of the gap with incentive is consistent incentives that reflect, what I'll call the missing money calculation to get people to install it. And, one of the things that I think will have the most immediate impact would be the sales tax exemption bill. Because affordable housing that's currently constructed, true affordable, 100% affordable, gets a sales tax exemption, but market rate doesn't. And solar has a sales tax exemption bill right now. And my estimate is that would shave off, 3 to 4% of the cost of a project, almost immediately, perform, uniformly throughout the state.
I agree with everything that has been said, but I also want to emphasize that doing a heat pump job in a house would be a lot more expensive than replacing the existing boiler. Because the heat pump most likely is going to require that you have to do the whole distribution. for the house. I mean, to run your indoor units. I mean, unless you have dogs that you can use, or you have, I mean, radiators that you can then use if you're doing a geothermal system, then you most likely going to have to work also on the distribution. So that does increase the price a lot. I mean, and with the fact that we're going to do also many more improvements to the house to make the system even work better. Yes, I mean, these jobs are going to cost more money than if you go traditionally with the same work that you were doing before. The incentive would really help in motivating owners to see that, I mean, the incremental cost doesn't really affect their pocket. I mean, getting this incentive money to help them pay for it is key. I mean, and it's disappointing to see that the clean heat incentive have been reduced for especially air source heat pump in many of these houses. But I agree with what was mentioned earlier by, I think it was Amar, that doing it at the point of construction is the right thing. I mean, for all of this stuff that we are installing in this building, we had to run a line, I mean, 220 from the circle, from the breaker in the house to the outlet. I mean, and that's additional cost that if we are doing it at the point of construction, then that could be, I mean, included in there, then the incremental cost wouldn't be that much than if you have to do it as a retrofit. I mean, the same thing if you are doing, I mean, some of the heat pumps that we were installing, I mean, we installed a 208, 220 unit, and that required that we run also a line because there wasn't a 220 in those areas that we wanted to connect it. So doing it at the point of construction is key, but otherwise increasing the incentives so we can then offset the additional cost is what we need. I mean, it's the additional money to motivate homeowners to really receive this work, and then don't look at it like that's just gonna cost them more money. I mean, now, and the last point that I wanna mention also is having a rate change for people that are going heat pumps. I mean, especially in the city, the price that we pay for kilowatt is way too expensive, and many of these jobs more costly on running them than especially if they have gas. So, but if we can then, I mean, provide to those homeowners, I mean, those buildings that are going electrifying a rate that would be more affordable, that also will motivate more people to get this job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. And I will just mention that the Gas Transition and Affordable Energy Act that is in the package deals with some of these issues that Jens and Francis just raised. So it deals with some of the socialized costs of the gas system that are currently being put on all gas customers when people connect new buildings or have new connections, and works to level the playing field and push people for electrification and make sure that electrification is affordable and equitable, and that we have a transition that is planned and seamless. And it also deals with that rate design that Francis was just talking about, and requires the Public Service Commission to revisit how rates are set in New York to make sure that electricity for electrification is affordable to everyone. I think, Jeff, you raised your hand again. Do you have a follow-up question? And then I think we'll probably close if there are no more hands after that. Okay, I saw Jeff's hand go down. So if there are no more questions, is there anything that any of our speakers want to add before we close?
I think I saw a question on the chat that asking what happens if we have an electric shutdown in these buildings that we are electrifying. And the reality is that, I mean, an electric shutdown, I mean, will affect a gas building almost the same way. Because, I mein, many of the systems that we have as a boiler may require some type of electrical ignition of a pump that will require, I mean, so you can then get the heat. But I mean, the one thing that is key to mention on the stove conversion, we are getting a lot of gas shutdown on cooking, I mean, on heating from the city of New York because of gas leak. I mean, and that's a reality that, I mean, and buildings, I mean, takes 3 months to 2 years sometimes just to get the gas restored to the building. And in the meantime, they're just cooking with a little cooking pot that doesn't allow them to really just have a normal life in the apartment. So So an electric shutdown, I mean, it's a reality that we may face. I mean, and that's a different topic that we may need to discuss. But I mean, if it happens, then the building will be affected almost the same way, unless you have other type of generation of heating, I mean, of electric in the apartment, in your building that most likely none of this building has.
Thank you for that, Francis. Does anybody have anything else they want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add a comment to the question with the electric rate. There are now new so-called voluntary time of use rates in effect. Keep in mind that the heating systems use mostly the energy at night when we usually have an excess of electricity. And the utilities experimenting with that. I'm personally on one of them where I charge my electric vehicle at night and I use most of my heating at night. And it has significantly reduced my heating bill and actually brought benefits to the grid by paying more into the electrical system. So it actually reduces rate for all the ratepayers. So this is coming.
Great, thank you. Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming today. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Thank you to members of the media who came. I'm going to drop my email address in the chat. These speakers and many others are available to do interviews for any stories that you're doing on electrification, on the transition off of fossil fuels in buildings, and on the budget. So let us know if we can connect you to any sources and information. A recording of this event will also be available. You can email me and we'll be sending it out to the registrants of this event as well, but you can email me for the recording. And I think that is everything. Thank you so much.